The morning sun barely peeked through the tall windows of Antonio's restaurant when Maya walked through the staff entrance. She had been working here for 3 long years, and every single day felt like climbing a mountain. At 26, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized every table, every corner, and every demanding customer's favorite order. Maya wasn't just any waitress. She was the kind of person who remembered that table 7 always wanted extra bread, that the woman who came in every Tuesday preferred her coffee scalding hot, and that the businessman at table 12 got nervous when his meetings ran late. She cared about people, even when they didn't notice her. The restaurant itself was something special. Antonio's wasn't just a place to eat, it was where the city's most important people came to make deals, celebrate victories, and show off their success. The walls were covered with dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and soft classical music played in the background. Everything screamed money and power, but the real centerpiece of the restaurant was the piano. It sat in the corner like a sleeping giant, its black surface so polished you could see a reflection in it. The piano was beautiful, expensive, and completely silent. In all her time working there, Maya had never seen anyone play it. It was just for show, like everything else in this place. Maya tied her apron and started her morning routine. She had learned to move quietly, to blend into the background, to be helpful without being noticed. That's what good service meant in a place like this, being invisible until someone needed something. As she polished glasses behind the bar, she couldn't help but look at the piano. Her fingers tingled just thinking about it. Most people didn't know that Maya had a secret. When she wasn't serving tables and cleaning up after rich customers, she was studying. Not just any subject, music. She was working toward becoming a music therapist, someone who could help people heal through the power of music. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, surrounded by luxury and beauty, serving people who had everything they could want, while she scraped together every penny to pay for her education. She worked double shifts, picked up extra hours whenever possible, and still barely made ends meet. But she never complained. She had a dream, and she was willing to work for it. Maya had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother had an old piano in her tiny apartment, and she taught Maya everything she knew. Even when the keys stuck and some notes didn't work properly, Maya loved that old instrument. It was where she learned that music wasn't just about hitting the right keys, it was about telling a story, sharing emotions, and connecting with people. As the morning turned into afternoon, Maya watched the restaurant fill up with its usual crowd. Businessmen in expensive suits, women wearing jewelry that cost more than Maya made in a year, and groups of people who spoke in hushed tones about deals worth millions of dollars. They all had one thing in common: they looked right. Through her. Maya didn't mind being invisible most of the time. It gave her a chance to observe, to learn, to understand people. She noticed how the powerful businessman at table 4 always ordered the same thing but never seemed to enjoy it. She saw how the woman who came in with different men every week always looked sad even when she was laughing. She watched how people who had everything still seemed to be searching for something. The lunch rush was particularly busy that day. Maya moved between tables like a dancer, carrying trays, taking orders, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Her feet hurt from standing for hours, but she kept smiling. She had learned that a genuine smile could sometimes brighten someone's day, even if they didn't realize it. During a brief break, Maya found herself standing near the piano again. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then gently touched one of the keys. The sound was perfect, rich, and clear. The piano was tuned regularly, even though no one played it. It seemed like such a waste. Maya closed her eyes and imagined herself playing. She could hear the music in her head, feel her fingers moving across the keys, see the faces of people who would stop and listen. But this wasn't her world. She was here to serve, not to perform. As the afternoon wore on, Maya noticed that the restaurant was preparing for something special. The manager was rushing around, making sure everything was perfect. The kitchen staff was working extra hard, preparing dishes that weren't on the regular menu. Even the other waitresses seemed more nervous than usual. Maya learned that a very important businessman was coming for dinner. He was the kind of person who made headlines, who had more money than most people could imagine, and who was known for being difficult to please. The restaurant was pulling out all the stops to impress him, and his guests. The man arrived with a group of well-dressed people who looked like they belonged in magazine photos. They were seated at the best table in the house, right next to the piano. Maya watched from a distance as they ordered expensive wine and the most costly items on the menu. The businessman was clearly the center of attention. He spoke with confidence, gestured dramatically, and commanded the room just by being there. But Maya noticed something else about him. He seemed cold, almost cruel. The way he spoke to the staff, the way he dismissed people with a wave of his hand, the way he looked at everyone like they were beneath him. Maya had served many wealthy customers over the years, and she had learned to read people quickly. Some were kind despite their wealth, others were demanding but fair, and a few were genuinely nice people who happened to have money. But this man was different. He seemed to enjoy making others feel small. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself assigned to serve his table. Her heart beat faster as she approached with their appetizers. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this man made her nervous. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was just another piece of furniture in the room. The conversation at the table was intense. They were discussing business deals, talking about millions of dollars like Maya talked about grocery shopping. The businessman was trying to convince his guests to invest in something, but Maya could tell they weren't entirely convinced. His voice was getting louder, his gestures more dramatic, and his patience was clearly wearing thin. Maya served their courses carefully, trying to be as invisible as possible. But she couldn't help noticing how the man treated everyone around him. He snapped his fingers at the busboy, spoke rudely to the sommelier, and completely ignored Maya when she refilled his water glass. It was like he thought being successful gave him the right to be mean to everyone else. As the night continued, Maya watched the dynamics at the table change. The businessman was getting more frustrated as his guests remained hesitant about his proposal. His charm was wearing thin, and his true personality was starting to show. Maya had seen this before. People who used their wealth and power to bully others, who thought money made them better than everyone else. Little did anyone know that this evening would change everything. The piano sat silently in the corner, waiting. Maya continued her work, unaware that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal hidden truths and challenge everything everyone thought they knew about worth, talent, and the power of music to transform lives. The tension at the businessman's table was getting thicker by the minute. Maya could feel it in the air as she approached with their final course of the evening. The man's voice had grown sharper, his movements more aggressive, and his guests looked increasingly uncomfortable. What had started as a friendly business dinner was turning into something much more unpleasant. Maya balanced the dessert tray carefully as she walked toward the table. She had done this thousands of times before, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way the businessman kept glancing around the room with frustration, or how his guests kept checking their phones like they wanted to escape. The whole atmosphere felt like a storm about to break. As she reached the table, Maya began placing the dessert plates in front of each guest. The businessman was in the middle of explaining his latest project, something about artificial intelligence and how it would change everything. His voice was getting louder, more desperate, as he tried to convince his guests to invest their money in his vision. "This isn't just an opportunity," he was saying, his hand moving dramatically as he spoke. "This is the future. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're not as smart as I thought you were." Maya cringed internally. She had heard plenty of business conversations over the years, but this man was being incredibly rude to people who were supposed to be his guests. The other people at the table exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly not appreciating being insulted. As Maya placed the last dessert plate on the table, she noticed that the businessman had his tablet open, showing charts and graphs to his Guests. The device was sitting right next to his water glass, which was almost empty. Maya reached across carefully to refill it, trying not to disturb the important presentation, but as she poured the water, something went wrong. Her elbow bumped against the businessman's arm just as he was making another dramatic gesture. The sudden contact startled both of them, and Maya watched in horror as the water glass tipped over, sending a wave of ice water directly onto the expensive tablet. The effect was immediate and devastating. The screen went black, water dripped off the edges, and the businessman's entire presentation disappeared in an instant. The table fell completely silent. Maya stared at the ruined device, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. For a moment, nobody moved. The businessman looked at his destroyed tablet, then slowly raised his eyes to Maya. His face was turning red, and she could see a vein starting to bulge in his forehead. The other guests at the table looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. "You clumsy, stupid girl," the businessman said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Maya's mouth went dry. She had never seen someone look so angry before. "I'm so sorry, sir. I can pay for the damage. I can pay for it." The businessman laughed, but there was no humor in it. This tablet contained months of work. Presentations, contracts, everything I needed for this meeting. And you just destroyed it all because you can't do your job properly. The man stood up from his chair, and Maya took a step back. He was tall, intimidating, and clearly used to getting his way. The other guests at the table looked embarrassed, but none of them said anything to defend her. They just sat there, watching the scene unfold like it was entertainment. "Sir, please," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm truly sorry. It was an accident. Maybe the information can be recovered, or an accident." The businessman's voice was getting louder now, and people at other tables were starting to stare. "You people are all the same. No skills, no intelligence, no ability to do anything right. I bet you can't do anything properly." Maya felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. She had dealt with rude customers before, but this was different. This man wasn't just upset about the accident. He was attacking her as a person, trying to make her feel worthless in front of everyone. The businessman looked around the restaurant, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting. His eyes landed on the piano in the corner, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "You see that piano over there?" he said, pointing dramatically. "I bet you couldn't play a simple children's song if your life depended on it. You probably don't even know what those black and white keys are for." Maya felt something shift inside her. The embarrassment was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a quiet anger that had been building for 3 years of being treated like she was invisible, like she didn't matter, like she was less than human. "Actually, sir," she said quietly, "I do know how to play the piano." The businessman laughed out loud, a harsh sound that echoed through the restaurant. "Oh, this is rich. The clumsy waitress thinks she's a musician. What's next? Are you going to tell me you're a doctor too?" His guests looked uncomfortable, but still, nobody spoke up. Maya realized that these people were probably used to watching him humiliate others. Maybe they were even afraid of him themselves. "I'm serious," Maya said, her voice getting stronger. "I can play." The businessman's eyes lit up with malicious glee. He had found a new way to entertain himself, a new way to prove his superiority. "All right then, here's what we're going to do. You're going to walk over to that piano, and you're going to try to play something, anything, and when you fail miserably, when you embarrass yourself in front of everyone here, maybe you'll learn to stay in your place." Maya's heart was racing, but not from fear anymore. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed, ignored, treated like she was nothing. She thought about her grandmother's old piano, about the hours she had spent practicing, about the dreams she was working so hard to achieve. "And if I can play?" she asked Dot. The businessman grinned. "If you can actually play something, and I mean really play, not just bang on the keys like a child, then I'll give you $1,000. But when you fail, you're fired. Your manager here will make sure of that." Maya glanced at her manager, who was standing nearby looking mortified. He clearly wanted to stop this whole situation, but he was afraid of offending such an important customer. The businessman's power and wealth gave him the ability to do whatever he wanted, and everyone knew it. "Those are the terms," the businessman continued, speaking loudly enough for the whole restaurant to hear. $1,000 if you can play, or you lose your job if you can't. What's it going to be? Maya looked around the restaurant. Every person was staring at her now, waiting to see what she would do. She could feel their eyes on her, some curious, some pitying, some just excited to see a show. The businessman stood there with his arms crossed, confident that he had already won. For a moment, Maya hesitated. She could apologize again, clean up the mess, and hope to keep her job. She could stay invisible, stay safe, stay small. That's what everyone expected her to do, but as she looked at the piano sitting in the corner, she realized that this moment was about more than just her job. It was about dignity, about respect, about proving that a person's worth isn't determined by their job title or their bank account. Maya straightened her shoulders and looked the businessman directly in the eyes. "I accept your challenge," she sighed, her voice clear and strong. "But I want everyone here to witness what happens next." The businessman's grin got even wider. He thought he had already won. He had no idea that he was about to discover just how wrong he could be about someone. Maya walked toward the piano, her heart pounding but her step steady. Behind her, the restaurant held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the waitress sat down at the keys. Maya's footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as she walked toward the piano. Every eye in the restaurant was on her, as she could feel the weight of their stares. Some people looked curious, others seemed to feel sorry for her, and a few appeared excited to see what they thought would be her public humiliation. The businessman stood behind her with his arms crossed, that cruel smile still on his face. He was already savoring what he believed would be his victory. In his mind, he had already won. He was about to watch this simple waitress embarrass herself in front of everyone, and then he would have the satisfaction of seeing her fired. It was just another way for him to prove his superiority, but Maya wasn't thinking about him anymore. As she approached the piano, she was thinking about her grandmother. She remembered sitting on a small stool next to the old woman, watching her wrinkled hands move across the yellowed keys. Her grandmother had taught her that music wasn't just about playing notes. It was about telling stories, sharing feelings, and connecting with people's hearts. "Remember, little one," her grandmother used to say, "when you play, you're not just pressing keys. You're speaking to people's souls. You're telling them they're not alone." Maya reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking at the beautiful instrument. It was so different from her grandmother's old piano. This one was perfect, polished, and expensive. But at its heart, it was still just a piano, an instrument waiting to share music with the world. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting her position slightly. The businessman chuckled behind her, clearly enjoying what he thought was her nervousness. "Take your time," he called out mockingly. "We're all waiting to hear your amazing performance." Maya ignored him. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The restaurant was so quiet she could hear people breathing. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to watch. The moment felt frozen in time. Then Maya began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, gentle, like a whisper, but they were perfect. Each note was clear and true, played with a precision that immediately caught everyone's attention. Maya had chosen to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that was both beautiful and incredibly difficult to play well. The businessman's smile started to fade. These weren't the clumsy sounds he had expected. These were the sounds of someone who really knew how to play. But he told himself it was probably just a simple song she had memorized. Anyone could learn to play one piece if they practiced enough. But as Maya continued playing, it became clear that this wasn't just someone who had memorized a tune. Her fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had been playing for years. She didn't have to look at her hands. They knew exactly where to go. The music flowed from her like it was coming from her very soul. The melody was hauntingly beautiful. It started soft and gentle, then grew stronger and more passionate. Maya's whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly as she played. She was no longer the nervous waitress who had spilled water on a customer's tablet. She was a musician, an artist, someone who could create beauty out of nothing but sound. People in the restaurant began to put down their forks and stop their conversations. The music was too beautiful to ignore. Even the businessman's guests, who had been looking embarrassed about the whole situation, were now staring at Maya with amazement. Maya's playing grew more complex as she moved into the more difficult parts of the piece. Her left hand played a steady, rhythmic bass line, while her right hand danced through intricate melodies. The music filled every corner of the restaurant, touching everyone who heard it. An elderly woman at a nearby table had tears in her eyes. She whispered to her husband, "I haven't heard playing like this since we went to Lincoln Center." Other customers were pulling out their phones, not to record Maya without permission, but to text their friends about the incredible performance they were witnessing. The businessman was no longer smiling. He was staring at Maya with a mixture of shock and confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to fail, to embarrass herself, to prove that she was just a clumsy waitress who didn't know her place. But instead she was playing. Like a professional musician, Maya was completely lost in the music now. She forgot about the restaurant, the customers, even the businessman who had challenged her. She was back in her grandmother's tiny apartment, playing for the woman who had taught her that music was the language of the heart. She was in her college practice rooms, working through difficult pieces late into the night. She was in all the places where music had been her companion, her comfort, her dream. The piece she was playing required incredible skill. There were rapid passages where her fingers had to move like lightning across the keys, and slow sections where every note had to be perfect and full of emotion. Maya played it all flawlessly, like she had been born to make this music. The kitchen staff had completely stopped working. They stood in the doorway, watching and listening. The chef, a man who had worked in restaurants for 30 years, shook his head in amazement. He had never seen anything like this. Other waitresses stood frozen with their trays, too captivated by the music to move. As Maya approached the climax of the piece, her playing became even more powerful. The music soared and danced, telling a story of struggle and triumph, of dreams that refused to die even when the world tried to crush them. Her fingers moved with impossible speed and precision, creating sounds that seemed to come from heaven itself. The businessman's mouth was hanging open. He had made his fortune by reading people, by knowing their weaknesses, by being able to predict what they would do. But he had been completely wrong about Maya. She wasn't just a waitress who could play a little piano. She was a real musician, someone with genuine talent and skill. Maya's playing filled the restaurant with such beauty that people forgot where they were. They forgot about their business deals, their social status, their expensive clothes and jewelry. All that mattered was the music and the incredible young woman who was creating it. As the piece built toward its conclusion, Maya's entire being seemed to merge with the piano. She wasn't just playing the music, she was becoming it. Every note was perfect, every phrase was filled with meaning, every moment was magical. The businessman's guests were staring at him now, their expressions saying what they couldn't speak out loud. How could he have been so wrong about someone? How could he have treated her so badly when she possessed such incredible talent? Maya played the final notes of the piece with a gentleness that made everyone in the restaurant hold their breath. The last note hung in the air for a moment, pure and beautiful, before slowly fading away. Then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart pounding from the emotion of the performance. She had just played better than she had ever played before. The music had come from a place deep inside her, a place where all her dreams and hopes lived. The silence stretched on, as if nobody wanted to break the spell that Maya's music had cast over the restaurant. Everyone was still processing what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a good performance, it was extraordinary. The businessman stood frozen, his face pale, staring at Maya like he was seeing her for the first time. He had thought he was dealing with a simple, Clumsy waitress. He had no idea he was about to discover just how much more there was to her story. The silence that followed Maya's performance seemed to last forever. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. The restaurant felt like it was under a spell, frozen in time by the power of the music they had just heard. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still resting gently on the keys. She could feel her heart beating fast, not from nervousness anymore, but from the pure joy of having played something so beautiful. For those few minutes she had forgotten about everything else: the spilled water, the angry businessman, the embarrassment. She had just been herself, sharing the music that lived in her soul. Slowly, she turned around on the piano bench to face the room. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the restaurant was staring at her with expressions of complete amazement. The elderly woman at table 3 had tears streaming down her face. The businessman's guests were looking at her like they had just witnessed a miracle. Even the tough-looking chef was standing in the kitchen doorway with his mouth hanging open. But it was the businessman's face that shocked Maya the most. The cruel smile was completely gone. His arms were no longer crossed in confidence. Instead, he stood there looking pale and confused, like someone had just told him that everything he believed about the world was wrong. Then, like a dam bursting, the silence was broken. Someone started clapping. Then another person joined in. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. People were not just clapping, they were standing up, cheering, wiping tears from their eyes. "Bravo!" shouted the elderly man at table 3. "That was incredible." "I've never heard anything so beautiful," said a woman near the window. Her voice filled with emotion. The applause went on and on. Maya had never experienced anything like it. She had played in recitals before, in her college auditorium, but this was different. These people hadn't come to hear music. They had just been eating dinner when something magical happened. And now they were showing her more appreciation than she had ever received. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling a little shaky. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. For 3 years, she had been invisible. In this restaurant, just another waitress, serving food and cleaning tables. Now everyone was looking at her like she was the most important person in the room. The businessman was still standing there, motionless, staring at her. His guests were clapping enthusiastically, but he seemed unable to move. Maya could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he was struggling to understand what had just happened. Finally, as the applause began to die down, he found his voice. "Where ... He started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was completely different now. Gone was the arrogant, mocking tone he had used before. He sounded almost ... dumble, like he was speaking to someone he respected. Maya took a deep breath. She had spent 3 years keeping her background to herself, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had learned that people often treated her differently when they knew about her education. Some customers became uncomfortable when they realized their waitress was more educated than they were. Others thought she was putting on airs or trying to be better than she was, but now, with everyone looking at her with such respect and admiration, she felt like she could finally tell the truth about who she really was. "I studied music at the university," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I graduated with highest honors from the music program. I've been playing piano since I was 7 years old." A murmur of surprise rippled through the restaurant. People exchanged glances, clearly amazed by this revelation. The businessman's guests were looking at him with expressions that weren't very friendly. They were beginning to understand just how badly he had treated someone who deserved their respect. "But that's not all," Maya continued, feeling braver with each word. "I'm currently working on my master's degree in music therapy. I work here to pay for my education, but my real goal is to help people heal through music. I want to work with children who have been through trauma, elderly people with dementia, anyone who could benefit from the power of music." The businessman's face grew even paler. He was realizing that he hadn't just insulted a waitress, he had insulted a highly educated, talented woman who was working toward a noble goal of helping others. I also compete in piano competitions, Maya added. Last year, I won the regional competition for young professionals. I was invited to perform at the State Music Festival. I've been playing professionally at weddings and events on weekends to help pay for my studies. The restaurant was completely silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. People were absorbing what Maya had told them, understanding that they had just witnessed something truly special. This wasn't just a waitress who could play piano, this was a serious musician. Someone who had dedicated her life to music and helping others. Maya's manager, who had been standing nervously in the corner during the whole confrontation, now stepped forward. Maya has been one of our best employees for 3 years, he said, his voice filled with admiration. She's always been professional, kind, and hardworking. I had no idea she was so talented. The businessman's guests were now looking at him with obvious disapproval. One of them, a well-dressed woman with gray hair, spoke up. "You owe this young lady more than an apology," she said firmly. "The way you treated her was completely unacceptable." Another guest, a man in an expensive suit, nodded in agreement. "I've never been so embarrassed to be associated with someone's behavior," he said. "This young woman has more class and dignity than you've shown all evening." The businessman looked around the table at his guests, then back at Maya. He was beginning to understand that this evening had changed everything. He had come here to impress these people, to convince them to invest in his company. Instead, he had shown them the worst side of himself, while Maya had shown them something beautiful and inspiring. He started, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling with words, something that probably didn't happen to him very often. "I don't understand. If you're so talented, so educated, why are you working as a waitress?" Maya looked at him calmly. "Because I believe in honest work," she said simply. "Because I'm not ashamed of any job that helps me reach my goals. Because I've learned that a person's worth isn't determined by their job title, but by how they treat others and what they contribute to the world." Her words hit the businessman like a physical blow. She was talking about him, about the way he had treated her, about the values he had shown that evening. But she wasn't being cruel or vindictive. She was simply telling the truth. The woman with gray hair stood up from the table. "Young lady," she said to Maya, "what you've shared with us tonight, both your music and your grace under pressure, has been truly inspiring. You've reminded us what real talent and character look like." Other people in the restaurant were nodding in agreement. Maya had not only amazed them with her musical ability, but she had also shown them what it meant to handle a difficult situation with dignity and strength. The businessman stood there, surrounded by the disappointed faces of his guests, looking at Maya with a mixture of shame and awe. He was beginning to realize that he had learned something important that night, about assumptions, about respect, and about the fact that extraordinary people can be found in the most unexpected places. Maya had proven that she was so much more than he had ever imagined. Now everyone was waiting to see what he would do with that knowledge. The businessman stood in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by the disappointed faces of his guests and the admiring eyes of everyone else looking at Maya. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he was completely speechless. All his life he had been the one in control, the one who commanded rooms and made others feel small. But now he felt smaller than he had ever felt before. Maya remained standing near the piano, calm and dignified despite everything that had happened. She wasn't gloating or trying to make the businessman feel worse. She was simply waiting to see what would happen next, her hands folded quietly in front of her. The silence stretched on until finally the businessman took a shaky breath. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was wrong," he said. "I was completely, terribly wrong about you." He looked around the restaurant, seeing the faces of people who had witnessed his cruel behavior. His guests were still staring at him with obvious disapproval. The other customers were watching with curiosity and judgment. Even his potential business partners looked like they wanted nothing to do with him. "I came here tonight thinking I was better than everyone else, he continued, his voice getting slightly stronger. I thought my success, my money, my power made me superior to people like, he paused, realizing how awful his words sounded. To people like you, but I was the ignorant one. I was the one who couldn't see past appearances. Maya listened quietly, but she could see something changing in the man's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine shame and regret. You have a gift, he said, looking directly at her. Not just your musical talent, though that's extraordinary. You have grace, dignity, and strength that I clearly lack. You've shown more class in the past hour than I've shown in years. One of his guests, the gray-haired woman, spoke up. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The businessman looked at her, then back at Maya. You're right. An apology isn't enough. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. I promised you $1,000 if you could play. But what you just did was worth so much more than that. He quickly wrote out a check and walked over to Maya. This is $10,000, he said, holding it out to her. It's not payment for your performance. It's an investment in your future, in your education, in the work you want to do helping others. Maya stared at the check, stunned. $10,000 would pay for her entire next semester, maybe more. It would mean she wouldn't have to work so many double shifts, wouldn't have to worry about whether she could afford her textbooks, but as she looked at the check, then at the businessman's face, she realized something important was happening here. This wasn't just about money. This man was trying to change, to become better than he had been. Thank you, she said, accepting the check. This will make a huge difference in my life. But I hope tonight makes a difference in yours too. The businessman nodded slowly. It already has. I've spent so many years focused on making money and gaining power that I forgot about treating people with basic human respect. You've reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. Maya's manager stepped forward, looking nervous. Sir, about Maya's job? Her job? The businessman looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned on his face. Oh, the threat to fire her. Please forget I ever said that. In fact, he turned to Maya. You shouldn't be working as a waitress. Not because there's anything wrong with the job, but because you have bigger things to do with your life. He pulled out his business card and handed it to her. My company has a foundation that supports music education and therapy programs. We've been looking for someone to help us expand our work with hospitals and schools. Someone who understands both music and helping people. Would you be interested in talking about it? Maya looked at the business card, hardly believing what she was hearing. A job in her field, doing exactly what she had dreamed of doing, with the resources to really make a difference in people's lives. Yes, she said, her voice filled with excitement. I would love to talk about it. The gray-haired woman smiled and approached Maya. I run a music conservatory, she said. If you're ever interested in performing more, or maybe teaching advanced students, please give me a call. She handed Maya her own business card. Another guest, the man in the expensive suit, joined them. I'm on the board of the Children's Hospital, he said. We've been trying to start a music therapy program for years, but haven't found the right person to lead it. Would you consider meeting with us? Maya looked around at all these successful people who were suddenly interested in helping her achieve her dreams. An hour ago, she had been just another invisible waitress. Now she was being offered opportunities she had only dreamed about. But the biggest change was in the businessman himself. The cruel, arrogant man who had tried to humiliate her was gone. In his place stood someone who looked genuinely humble and sorry for his actions. Maya, he said quietly, I want you to know that tonight has taught me something important. Success without compassion is meaningless. Wealth without kindness is worthless. I've spent years building a business empire, but I forgot to build character along the way. He looked around the restaurant, at all the people who were still watching and listening. I want to do better, I want to be better, and I want to start by supporting people like you, people who are working to make the world more beautiful and healing. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but they were tears of joy and relief. Music has always been my way of connecting with people, she said. Tonight showed me that it can also be a way of changing people. Your willingness to admit you were wrong and try to do better means more to me than any amount of money." The restaurant erupted in applause again, but this time it was for both of them, for Maya's grace and talent, and for the businessman's courage to admit his mistakes and try to change. 6 months later, Maya stood in front of a group of children at the city's largest hospital. She was no longer wearing a waitress uniform. Instead, she wore professional clothes and a badge that read Director of Music Therapy. The businessman's foundation had not only hired her, but had given her the resources to create the kind of program she had always dreamed of. The businessman himself had become a regular volunteer at the hospital, reading to children and helping with their activities. He had kept his promise to become a better person, and his relationship with Maya had evolved from antagonist to mentor to friend. As Maya sat down at the piano in the children's ward, she thought about that night at the restaurant. She had walked toward that piano not knowing it would change her entire life. She had simply wanted to stand up for herself, to show that she was more than people assumed. But in the process, she had not only transformed her own future, she had helped transform someone else's heart. And that, she realized, was the real power of music. It didn't just entertain or impress people. It had the ability to touch souls, change minds, and bring out the best in humanity. Maya began to play for the children, and once again, her music filled the room with hope, healing, and the promise that beautiful things could happen when people dared to see beyond the surface to the extraordinary potential that exists in everyone.